Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 6 of a series focused on client apps in Microsoft Intune, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And today's session will focus on iOS app deployments and how we get those done, right? So part 6 today, there's been a bit of a time gap between part 6 and part 5 when I recorded that for part 5 was focused on Windows. And since then, we've had an updated console. Really, the console is the same. It's just rebranded now to the new URL that you can access it at. So endpoint.microsoft.com is where we would go to get to that console. And then there's a troubleshooting part that has been added not too long ago. It may have even been there when I did the Windows session. I can't recall, but I want to show it to you because it's kind of cool, you know, and a nice little addition. Not a huge change, but a pretty big, not a huge change visually, but a pretty impactful change in terms of troubleshooting. We'll get to that in a bit. So let's just jump on in. So in terms of agenda, here's where we're going. I want to talk about what are apps, which we kind of know what they are, but we'll talk about them anyway. Why we care, which that's kind of intuitive as well. But then when we get into the apps, I want to talk about the scenarios for iOS app deployment, the requirements as we go through each, show how each works, and then show configuring each and watch them in action. We'll wrap up with troubleshooting tips and tricks. Okay? So what are apps? Apps are all about, hey, big surprise here, app deployment, getting an application onto devices in an automated way. That's one of the things you can do with Intune, and one of the things you'll want to do as an administrator. The option here, the use of apps, very robust, so you can deploy all the types of apps that an iPad or an iPhone will accept. Again, this session focused on iOS. Note that's not macOS. macOS will have its own session. This is iOS, iPhone, and iPad. Robust in terms you can deploy an app as required, as available. You can even enforce an uninstall of the app. You can target users. You can target devices, both in some scenarios, or just one or the other in other scenarios. We'll see that coming up. Very flexible in terms of what you deploy and how you deploy it. It's a modern approach to doing deployment. It's familiar because it's in Intune, where if you're working in that environment for anything currently, then just kind of adapting that to another OS, another type of app deployment, pretty easy. And again, familiar, even if you're just coming from Config Manager and doing Intune, the idea of app deployment is certainly a big cog in the wheel for Config Manager. Similarly, you can do the app deployments for Intune. There are, of course, differences between Config Manager and Intune, but still, Intune, very robust, especially for app deployment of iOS and Android. It's a great solution for doing that. Great for Windows too, but just some differences there. Anyway, I won't go off on that tangent here. Why do we care about apps? Well, very simply put, app deployment. That's what it's about, being able to consistently deploy apps, being able to have your app deployments be managed, just kind of be routine. It's just something that happens according to established norms in your environment, right? Okay, in terms of scenarios, right, there are 4 scenarios by which we support app deployment. One of them is the ability to deploy store apps, right? So Apple Store apps there can be deployed through Intune very, very well. Right? Line of business apps. So this is one, if you have your own internally built application and you want to deploy that to your environment, you can do that with Intune. Right? Web links, you can deploy web links. There's also that would be like a web page for if you have an application manifesting as a web page, you can deploy a link to that web page with Intune. Pretty simple. Built-in apps. So we'll talk about that more when we get there, but we can deploy that category of apps as well. And I think the order I'm going to hit these is a little bit different here. I think I put web link ahead of line of business. Anyway, we'll get to all 4 of them as we go along. Okay, so let's jump right into the scenarios. First scenario I want to talk about is leveraging Intune to deploy a store app to your iOS devices. And we're going to take these one at a time. I'm going to spend more time on this one to demonstrate a few things than I will on the other ones. And specifically what I mean by that is you can deploy apps to users and devices, depending on configuration. You'll see that in a minute. you can deploy apps as available or required or in an uninstall. You'll see that in a minute. So I want to walk through a few scenarios here for store apps, and then I won't do it and repeat it for the other ones, but I'll walk through a few here. All right. So in terms of store apps, what are the requirements? Well, clearly you need to have the Apple Store because that's where the apps are going to be. They're going to be in the Apple Store. So the idea is you browse the app when you're configuring the deployment. You browse the Apple Store in Intune to select the app, and then you go ahead and further assign that app or deploy that app with Intune. Right now, a couple of caveats with that. When you select apps using this method, the only apps that can be deployed and assigned are those apps that are free of charge in the App Store. If there is an app that has a monetary cost, you can't deploy it this way. You might want to use something like the Apple Volume Purchase Program to do paid apps and so on, right? Now, in terms of apps deployed this way, when they need to update or when there's a new version out there, then that new version will be deployed automatically from the App Store, right? And then under Other, this is where I want to just call out this thing called the Apple Volume Purchase Program. So this is something that organizations can opt into. You don't have to be part of the Apple Volume Purchase Program. There are some things you won't be able to get. As I mentioned, being able to deploy paid apps, you can't do that in Intune unless you have Apple Volume Purchase Program, or VPP for short. Now, another thing, so I'm not going to dive deeply into this. There is a web page that describes this in detail about the Volume Purchase Program, but depending upon your configuration and the way you do your deployment, the end user may need to sign into the Apple Store when the app is deployed. Now, the user won't be billed for an app if it's already purchased, but to give you a couple of specifics, if you're deploying an app in the Volume Purchase Program using device licensing, then the user sign-in is not required. But if you're using user licensing instead, then every end user that receives the app must sign into the Apple Store with an Apple ID uniquely to be able to obtain the app. Right? Again, they're not charged, but that is a requirement. Again, if you want more detail, there is an article devoted to the Apple Volume Purchase Program in Intune that goes through the various scenarios. So how does this work, right? Store apps. How does it work? So basically, in a very general format, the store app, the administrator selects the store app and chooses to deploy either to a user or device group, and then the app is deployed. It can be either available, required, or uninstalled, right? Now, if it's available, you can't really require it, so you can't really force it. So it would need to be whenever a user's on the device, it would go through the company portal. You'll see that in a minute, right? But then finally, the app gets down to the device. If it's required, the user on the device is prompted to install the app. If it's available, it just goes through the company portal, right? Okay, so let's actually walk through and see how this works. I'm going to bring in the Intune console, and we'll walk through it. So specifically, to get I have a few already configured we'll jump to, but to get the app started, we would go to All Apps, we would select Add, and we would choose iOS Store App. And this is where we would select Next. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but then we would search the Apple Store, and maybe I want to do something like Adobe. All right, and it's searching, and so it'll pop up the choice. You just select and move on down and proceed through the wizard. All right, here we would see the detail come in and so on. We would eventually get to scope tags, assignments, and then finally review and create. All right, so I already have some of these created. So let me pop open the real one here that I want to show you, Adobe. I've already got configured, and edit that. So if I pop that open, as soon as it comes up, come on. All right, and I hit Properties. So here I will see all of the metadata that was brought in. So here's the name that was brought in, the description that comes in. In fact, let me edit this. There's a few items in here that are chosen, such as the URL that comes in. The minimum operating system is displayed here. Now you can choose something else. You can't go lower but you can go higher if for some reason you wanted to. The applicable device types, if you wanted this for iPad and not iPhone or iPod, you can do that, right? The category is up to you. So show this as a featured app in the company portal. If in fact you're going to deploy it to the user as available in the company portal, you could choose that. Other things that you can put in. Here's the icon that will show up. So I can review and save that. Now, other options in here as I scroll down, let me save, would be to deploy this. Now, I'm going to deploy, like, as I mentioned, the store apps in 3 different ways. I'm not going to care about scope tags, but my assignment, I will. All right. And so before I do my assignment, well, let me go ahead and set it up. So here, I'm going to do this as a required assignment. Notice I can add a group, which is what I will do to choose a custom group. Also, I could choose all users and all devices. Now, this is important because this setting tells you that you do at least have the option of assigning to users and devices. In some scenarios, you cannot do that, right? So let me show you. So available for enrolled devices. You can only do available to users. Makes sense, right? Because devices don't have the ability to check the company portal. So available for enrolled devices can only be set up with user groups. Also available with or without enrollment, again, users. And uninstall can be done with users or devices. All right. So in this scenario, I want to set up for devices. So I'm going to add a group. And I'm going to do my demo iPad group or iPhone group. Okay. So select. And I'm not saving it yet. I'm going to review and save. But before I do that, I want to pull in my iPhone for a second. All right. So I'm mirroring my screen from my iPhone. It'll come over. So you'll see I have the company portal app, but I don't have this app here. So let me go ahead and save the deployment of the app. So save, right? Now, let's see what happens here. I'm going to move this on over and we'll just watch my iPhone. In fact, if it doesn't happen right away, I'll go ahead and kick it. I'll explain this a little bit later. Let me go ahead and kick it out. It may prompt while it's off the screen. If so, I'll bring it in. But let me go back. So let me go to devices. Okay. So devices, iOS device. And what I want to do simply here is go ahead to my iPhone and select sync. I'm going to say yes. Now, what's going to happen, let me bring this back in. All right, we'll watch that for a minute. So the sync's initiated, and we'll see about how long it takes to have the iPhone respond. It'll take just a second or two, I'm sure. So let's wait for it. Well, I waited here for a second, and it was taking longer than I thought, so I kept wondering, okay, why? What's happening? So I went to check, and I wanted to come let you see, because I made a mistake with the configuration. Let me go back and pull my iPhone off the screen for a moment. I'll go back to my apps, and all apps, and here's the one I just deployed right here. And so sometimes I guess talking, I click too quickly, but I have my assignment. Required is what I intended, but it's available. So I'm going to go edit that. That's why it didn't pop up. I'm going to go edit that, and I'm going to remove this and make it required. Come back to that. So add a group. This should be a bit of a different experience. So demo iPhones. Now I'm going to select that. Now I'm going to save this. Review and save, and then finally save. Now let's go back to my device list. So devices. Here's my device list. Here we go, and here's my iPhone. Right, so nothing's happened on it yet. Let me go ahead and try a sync on it, and I'll talk more about the sync in just a minute. Bring this back up. And now we will we'll see what happens with it. All right. There we go. I was going to pause the video, but I didn't need to just that quickly. We see, in fact, we're being prompted for the app install. So I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and install. And so that will allow the app to install. So this is required for the device, right? For the device. So that's installing, no problem. I'm going to pull this off to the left and we'll go do another one. So for another application type here, another store app, I have another example configured. And so here I have, here's the one I just deployed. Here's another iOS store app somewhere. Where did I put it? Oh, I did not name it. Here's the other one. Where's the iOS store app? Let me go find it. Here's another one. So that's not one I want. Here's another one that I have. So we'll just do this one, right? So now for this one, so I'm a little bit focused on this, so I want it to line up. So bear with me as I call this demo app. Okay, good enough. And I don't know if there was a dash in there or not, but that's enough. I will save it, and then it will show up where I want it to. So review and save. And then now I want to go through and assign this. So this was not assigned. So now I want to go assign it. So before I leave here, I'm going to scroll back down and look at my assignment. Not assigned. And here I want to require this, but I want to require it this time to a user. I'm just going to use all users here. And I'm going to notice this uninstall on device required. If you want to do that, you can, or uninstall on device removal. You can flag that if you want to. So that means if the device is removed from Intune management, you can cause the device to be uninstalled as well, whichever. Right? Anyway, I'm going to save this. Here we go. Finally, and save. Right? So that should be working its way out. I'm going to go in and be ready to force this if I need to. So devices and iOS. Here's my iPhone again. I'll just bring my iPhone back in so you can see I do have the Adobe install completed, so I'm going to force another sync. Again, I'll talk to you about that in a minute. Bring the iPhone back up so the sync is initiated, and we will see what happens. I'm going to pause here, and we'll come back whenever the next step happens. Okay, and so here's the prompt. It's the exact same prompt as I have with a required targeted to a device. The user is going to get, of the device is going to get the prompt either way. I'm going to go ahead and tap install, so the app will come down and begin to install. But notice this, right? Notice this. I am now being prompted to actually enter the password on my device. And so this is the difference between device required and user required. So I'm going to pull my iPhone off to the side, and I will enter my password real quick. Pardon the silence, can't type and talk at the same time, I don't think, especially on this small iPhone keyboard. So let me pull this back in. So I have my password entered. I'm going to say, okay, get. And so that will hopefully authenticate if there's no typos there. And then the app install should begin. And it is beginning, right? So that's the difference with user targeted but required. Device targeted but required, all you have to do is say go. User targeted and required, you can say go, but then you have to submit your password and so on. Now, the third type that I want to show you here is whenever the app is just simply available. In fact, I've already got this configured and pushed down to the device. So here's my all apps. And so the other one, I'm going to find the other one and make the adjustment to it as well. So here's the other one. And pardon me as I fulfill my need to make it line up. So demo app. Okay, so this app is deployed. Right? All these things are set, review and save. And I'm going to save this. All right, now this particular app is already assigned, right? So if I look at this, I get to Venmo, it's already assigned. This is actually deployed to the device or to the user on the device as available. Right. So if I can scroll on down, okay, here available for all users on the enrolled device, and so I'm going to go ahead and bring the iPhone back in. So here it is, and I'm just going to simply launch the company portal, and you'll see the company portal, Venmo or whatever, is here, right? So this is whenever I had PayPal published incorrectly to the company portal as available. Here's the Venmo that I did in fact deploy to the company portal as available, and I can click install, and that will cause the application to get prepared for install. I can go back to the home screen and should see indications that it's going to install here in any moment, right? So there we go. I'm being prompted. I'm going to go ahead and allow that install, and so the process finishes up. So I'll go ahead and pull this out of the way, and then move the console out of the way as well. Right? So that's a couple of different ways that you can configure and deploy an app from the Apple Store. Okay. Now I did that on purpose so you can see a few different scenarios. On future examples, I'm not going to make you wade through all of those, right? But I will show you at least the device targeted install for the other ones. All right. Okay. So the next type is web link, right? Now this one is really the scenario where, well, here's the requirements. So you do need a valid web app. That could be whatever the app is in your organization. I'm going to use Bing, right? You could argue maybe it is a web app, but you could argue maybe it's not. Either way, it's a URL shortcut I'm going to use. What this is going to do is create a shortcut on the device's home screen, so you can immediately go to the particular website that you want to. In terms of app updates, those happen automatically. As the website's updated, you get the updates as you go to them on the device. All right. In terms of how this works, very simple. So the web link is selected and then deployed as available or required to user or device groups. Same kind of thing. If it's required, the user or device is prompted to install. If it's available, user initiates from the company portal. So let's go see this one. So I'll go ahead and pull back in Intune and go back to apps. All right, and here I'm going to look at all apps, and I do have Bing, my web link, here. I don't have it deployed, right? So I'll show you the configuration. I'm going to go to properties and just edit this, and so this is the metadata related to the app. Now this one's interesting. Require a managed browser to open this link. So what this means is when you deploy this web app, right? Well, first of all, what are the managed browsers? There's two. There's the Edge managed browser that you can download from the various stores. It works on Android, works on Apple as well. Then there's the Intune managed browser, which is frankly the original version of the managed browser, still out there, but the recommendation is to use Edge these days for the managed browser. So here's the deal. If you turn this switch on and say yes, then when the web link goes down onto the device and the user clicks on it, the user then knows, the app, when it's installed, knows only open in the managed browser. So it will automatically bring open that particular web page on your managed browser, right? When you set this to yes. Right. Okay, and then just other metadata that you can do. I'm going to review this and save it because I want to then deploy this. Okay. So save, and then we'll go back in and we will deploy this. Now I'm going to deploy this assign this is the Intune term, as required to my demo group. All right, so demo iPhones. So that's good. I'm going to select that, and then we're going to go down here and click review and save. All right, so clicking review and save, and then I'm going to save, go down. There we go. All right, so like before, let me bring in the, I'm going to go ahead and do a force a sync. I'll show you on the iPad. Nothing's here. right? The web link is not here. I'm going to go in and navigate to my device and do a forced sync. Again, I'll talk to you about this a little bit later in what I'm doing and why. Okay, so here's my iPad, and then I'm going to sync. So yes, and then I'm going to bring up my iPhone, right? Here it is. And we'll give it a second, see if it pops open like I expect it to. But if not, I will pause and then come back when it does pop up. Yeah, let me pause for a second. Okay, and I didn't give it long enough. It didn't prompt me. This just dropped onto the home screen. So in this case, sorry, I should have not paused it. I didn't want you to have to sit through that, but it just popped onto the home screen as a web app. So if I then tap on it, it's going to bring me up to Bean, right? Just like it was supposed to. It just takes me to that URL, right? Get rid of this. So that's deploying a web app, right? So I didn't have to say yes in this case. I think I did before when I first had it on here, but I did have this on here a minute ago. So maybe it didn't prompt me this time. I don't recall. But either way, that's how it works. All right, so let me pull this out of the picture here, and we will move on to the other type here. So moving on to line of business, right? Line of business applications. So this one's interesting, and the requirements are a little bit different. So one of the things you need here are the source files. You will need the source files for the application that you're wanting to install. So when we say line of business, oops, didn't mean to launch that. Whenever we say line of business, what that means is it is an app that you have control of the source files. Usually it's an app written in-house, right? So you need those source files. On an Apple device, they will be with a .ipa extension. So unlike the other app install types where you're using the Apple Store or a web link or built-in whatever, where those are staged in the various stores for you, here you're going to need to store the source files somewhere so that your device can access them and pull them down whenever it comes install time. In this case, you will use cloud storage in Azure, right? So specifically with cloud storage, I'll go ahead and mention this here. I may mention it again. There's a couple of things to know. You can create a trial Intune account. If you're using a trial Intune tenant, then you are limited to a total of 2 gigabytes of space in your cloud storage while you're in trial status. If you're in a fully licensed mode, then your cloud storage is unlimited, but there is one caveat. No file in the source set can exceed 8 gigabyte. Now it can be bigger than 8 gigabyte collectively, but no single file can be over 8 gigabyte, right? And then in terms of the app updates, you're responsible for doing the app updates. It's your software, and so you need to supply the updates and so on. Right now, another thing here that I didn't really mention, but I'll mention it here because I'm afraid I'll forget it otherwise. You're building this app into Intune, and that means you have the current source files. If you have an app update, then I'll show you how to do an update of the source files. But the question has come up before, how does Intune know what version of the source files you're using or not? And the answer really is Intune doesn't know what version of source files you're using. What Intune does is as you create an app, in this case a line of business app, it will be assigned a version number, call it version 1. And I think about the application model in Config Manager when I think about this, but it's assigned a version number. And then when you make a change to that particular app, the version number increases. That's how the device knows, hey, I'm assigned this app. I've installed it already, but look, there's a new version of it out there. I need to go install that, right? So when you update the source files, it will increase the version number internally in Intune. Then the device sees it and knows to go update, right? So that comment may be a little bit out of place, but I wanted to go ahead and say it because otherwise I might forget to bring it in. Okay, so how does this work? So effectively, you have Intune up here, and then you have Intune storage. So you're going to configure the deployment of your line of business app in Intune, and that's going to be through an IPA. So the IPA policy, deployment policy, is going to be sent down to the device. The device is going to then download the content from Intune storage, and then ultimately then go ahead and do the install. So this is a PC, really should be an iPhone or an iPad, but you still get the idea. So the supported file types for this, again, .ipa, right? Okay, so let's actually go see how this works and is configured. So I'm just going to walk you through, I'm going to walk you through the one that I already have configured, because I don't think I have the source files on my desktop anymore. Either way. So here's my demo app, and this one is named appropriately. Where is it? Why am I skipping over it? WhatsApp, right here. Sorry, right in front of my face. WhatsApp, line of business. Now, what I'm going to say here, I'm not going to point you anywhere specific, but I will just tell you that if you're struggling for trying to find an IPA file to play with and to demo, there are places on the web that you can download demo IPA files. That's what I did here for my testing, is I just downloaded something I could quickly throw out there and play with, because I don't have an IPA built myself. I'll let you find them yourself, because just you want to make sure that you vet out whatever you're going to work with in your lab. But there are places you can go download it. So here's one that I've worked with. And in terms of properties, I'll go edit it, right? So right up top, you see the source files, .ipa, right? And then down the rest, all of this is metadata that I can choose from, right? All right. And then I can review and save. Now, so just like normal, right? Now, what I want to do is deploy this to my device. So I'm going to deploy it, or sorry, I keep using deploy. The term in Intune is assign. I'm going to assign as a required app to my device. So I'm going to pull in my demo group. There, select it. And then I'm going to review and save. And I'm going to save. Good enough. Off we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and proactively move to devices, and my iOS device, and here, and I'm going to go ahead and do the sync on it because I'm here. Okay, say yes, and then bring in the iPhone, and we'll just hang out here for a minute and see what happens. Now, this is not a tiny app, and so it does take a couple of seconds probably to download onto the device and be ready to install. But hopefully I'll get a prompt here. This one's already also been on the device, and so we'll see. If we get a prompt, I think I will, versus just having it start to install. So just give it a second. If it takes too long, I'll pause again, but don't want to miss the action. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause and wait for the next step to happen. Okay, so that took a little bit longer than I had thought, but this is not a tiny app, so it might have just been that. So I'm going to go, same thing, just prompting to install. I'm going to click on install, and we should start to see the install will happen. Now, this one, I'm not sure why. It doesn't really matter. I'm able to show you the demo. It doesn't work whenever I launch it, but it does get here. And so we'll actually see this. I'm going to try to launch it here whenever it finishes the install, and I'll get a failure. And then this is one of the ones I will look at. Well, all the other ones, it looks like, are succeeding, but this is one of the ones I will look at. If it is in failed, it should be in failed status whenever we get to the troubleshooting part. So let this finish up, and I will tap to launch it and move on. So I'm going to go leave the screen here and go ahead and move on. And the last item that we want to talk about is the built-in style of apps. So the question here might be, what are built-in apps? Okay, so built-in apps really, they used to be expressed differently in the console. Think back to our discussion on Microsoft Application Management, and also, I haven't checked for sure, but the app configuration policies, or app configuration that we talked about along with Microsoft Application Management, separate concept, but we talked about them one right after the other. That's what these are, right? These are the enlightened kind of apps that you can deploy to your device and then manage with Microsoft Application Management. So let's look at them. So in terms of requirements, you need a built-in app, right? In terms of the app updates, they are handled automatically when updates are published. All right. In terms of how it works, basically the same way. The built-in app is going to be selected, deployed to the user or device group, available, required. You could also do an uninstall, and then the same kind of behavior will be seen, right? So these are store apps. So we've already talked about, you've seen the scenario where a user can be prompted to sign in with their Apple ID. So that definitely happens in some scenarios, specifically when the user itself or themselves are targeted. So let's actually look at a configuration. Pull back in Intune. So here I do have an app configured already, but I want to walk you through the process. So we go to All Apps. So here is my built-in app. I'm using Cortana, but I'm going to go ahead and configure this. So while I'm here, I'll show you. Here's the store apps for iOS. All the other types for iOS. There's a couple for macOS, but we're not talking about macOS. We're talking about iOS. So here's the web link, line of business, and then here's built-in app, right? So I can go select this, and then I can add the built-in app from a list. So this is the list of apps that are pre-configured that can be used. And so you'll see an Android version, an iOS version, as we scroll along, right? So all of these are the managed apps, those that are ready to be managed with Microsoft Application Management once they're deployed, right? So I'll go back now and just show you what I've already got configured. So let me go back to apps, and here's my built-in. So Cortana, my properties, so all of these details, right? All the metadata, and I'm going to then deploy it or assign it as required to my device group, my demo group. Well, if I can type correctly, demo, iPhones, here we go, and I will save this, and save, and then save. All right, good enough. So I'm going to do like before, come over here to devices and immediately synchronize. All right, sync, yes. And so then I will pull in the iPad, and we'll just see here what, or the iPhone, we will see here what happens. Hopefully it won't take all that long. There it comes. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, go ahead and allow install. So that install will take off and begin to load, right? Okay, so it's loading over the icon for WhatsApp because WhatsApp failed, as I mentioned. So I'll go ahead and pull this window out and move on, right? Okay. Now, so you've seen all four scenarios for app deployment with Intune and iOS. So I want to walk you through, first of all, a little bit of troubleshooting. So I'm going to pull back in the Intune console for that. And we're going to go back to the individual apps, right? So let me go back to apps, and we're going to choose one just along the way. Go to all apps. We'll use one of my demo apps. Here's the Adobe. And so first of all, just on the dashboard for the app, we can see the install status. So I've got one total, and it's installed. My lab's pretty simple, obviously, and so your experience would be different perhaps, but I did get mine installed. And so here's just your first view of how things are working. You can certainly look at device install status. Here I do have everything set up and installed as I thought. User install status, I also see that I have one installations for me, the user. If I had multiple devices I'm installing to, then you would see maybe multiple installations, failures, whatever the case may be, right? Now, there's another section here for troubleshooting called, at the very bottom, Troubleshooting plus Support. So this is a really interesting section, right? And we've been here before, but I just want to call out a couple of things. So I'm going to go select a user. So I do have to select a user here. So I'm going to select myself. Now, I have not deployed, except for two apps anyway, a couple of apps I've not deployed to this user. I've deployed to the device, right? But that's kind of the point of putting the user in, is so that you can see the devices that are owned by the user. So let's just kind of scroll through this for a minute. Let's imagine that this user calls the help desk or needs help or whatever, right? And they call in, they're talking to someone, and the first thing the Intune administrator would do is come in here and put in that user's name. And this gives them a really nice profile about the user. You can see, hey, these are the client apps, and these are the ones that are assigned specifically to the user, right? And then this, certainly we've done a lot more demos than just this in our time together here. But now we can scroll on down, we can see the devices that are assigned to the user. So I could certainly go into these and see what I want to see. And these are just kind of looking at this is not really troubleshooting of the app, right? This is not telling you success or failure. It's just showing you what apps are specifically assigned to this particular user. But if we want to see all the apps that are targeted to the device, which will include the user in this case, I believe, we can go down to managed apps, right? And so Venmo is set up to be in the list, right? And it was targeted to the user, and PayPal was targeted initially to the user. And so these are in the list. And so what you see here are a couple of things. First, you see this thing called resolved intent. So what is resolved intent? Well, put simply, it's this. And by accident, I actually did what I wanted to do. So whenever I first configured the PayPal app, I configured it as available to the user, and and it showed up in Company Portal. What I wanted to do was configure this as required. And so what this is saying is that PayPal is configured as both required and available installs. So what this is calling out for you is the fact that for this particular app, there have been a couple of different configurations applied to it. Here, we've deployed this as required and available. So the required is going to win. You can kind of visually look at that and tell. There's other things. So here, we just have this one set as available, right? So if you're thinking that the user's supposed to get a deployment, and this is an improvement in the console. Used to be you would deploy an app to a user, and you would think, well, why is the user not, or a device, why is the user on that device not getting the app? I deployed it as required, and so why are they, what's going wrong? Or a better scenario would be to say, why is the user being forced to take the app? I deployed it as available. I just wanted it to be in the company portal. And so this is trying to surface for you, hey, there are configurations where you might have yourself deploying an app, but maybe another administrator deploying an app, and you're having conflicting settings. And so this from Intune is just saying, look, for this one app, we've got a couple of different configurations out there, right? You might even have an install paired with an uninstall, right? So this helps clear that up a bit. There's a whole section on this in the documentation. If you want to just look at resolved intent, just search for that and get the Microsoft Docs, then you can certainly pull the information from there. Now, the other thing that's on the screen here is this installation status, right? So we have all of our apps have installed successfully. This is the one that failed, told you it would. And so now if I want to diagnose it, I can just click into this. What I'm going to see is the workflow of what's going on, right? So the app was created, the app was updated, and the app install failed. Another check-in, another application install attempted, right? And so we just see the pathway going up from here. Now, we know the app install failed, so this is awesome to see the workflow here and be able to see where the failure happened. So in this case, I'm going to click on Show Details, and what I see is this particular error code right here. Now, this is awesome to be able to see this error code and then be able to go try to troubleshoot that error code. We used to be in earlier versions before we had this, it was really hard to get the error code. We didn't see it, right? But now we have it, and so we can go pull the error and see what that is. Now I say go pull the error to see what that error translates to. There is a web page now. There's one for iOS, there's one for Android that will show you the error codes. Let me just pull this in. And so iOS and iPadOS app installation error codes. You can just scroll through here and see all of the different errors. And so we'll get to mine. Here it is, right here. The app installation failed. So if we go on over a little bit more, we see an app installation failure occurred. And then the console logs are needed to troubleshoot this error. What are the console logs? Well, the console logs are obtained by hooking up to the specific device with a PC and using software to pull off those logs. Beyond the scope of what I want to do here, right? But the point is, you can absolutely read the error. You can see, hey, I need to go to the console logs to get this. Sometimes you'll see what the error actually means just in here, right? But anyway, so it kind of tells you what's going on, directs you to the next step to, in this case, to investigate the problem. So this is a really nice addition to have to help us troubleshoot what's going on with app deployment on iOS. And I said there's an Android version as well, right? So this is in the console and really helpful, really nice addition that happened not too long ago as I'm thinking through this. All right. Cool. So let me move this out of the way again. A few tips and tricks. So we've already talked about and demonstrated targeting. You can target the user, you can target the device. The question is, which one is the right one? And the answer is, it's whichever one you need, right? If you're letting the user be in scope for your deployments, then yeah, target the user. If you have multiple users that use a device, and you don't care so much about the user, then target the device. There are some scenarios, such as deploying an app as available, where you can't target anything but the user, right? For Microsoft Application Management, right? Some of the built-in apps, targeting the user is the most appropriate thing, right? Even though you saw me target the device, if it's a built-in app, a managed app, targeting the user is generally the better thing. Right? You can deploy as available. You can deploy as required. You can do an uninstall. Right? Now, one of the things about required, okay, I was going to show you, forgot to, but I'll mention it to you here. So if I deploy an app as required, and then the user deletes the app, then that app will actually get triggered to reinstall whenever the device realizes it's required and it's not there. Right, so that is going to happen. There's a 7-day cycle where a lot of things happen on devices, and sometimes app checks go on. But if it's a required app, it should be within 24 hours that happens. The company portal also showed you that. So the company portal is involved whenever you're actually targeting an app as available. We talked about policy sets in a previous session. So that's an interesting option when you're deploying apps, to be able to lump apps together, group apps together that are particularly interesting for a type of device or a type of user or a particular function or something like that. I didn't show it to you here because the configuration is a little bit more than I wanted to get into, but I showed you the app deployments, right? There is the ability to configure an on-demand VPN. So if there are certain apps that need a VPN connection to be able to function, then there's ways to link up apps with the VPN profiles. And when that app launches, you can trigger the VPN to launch as well. So didn't get into that here. Kind of a little bit different, again, than I wanted to get into in this session, but want to call out that is there. Also, one thing to think about whenever you're deploying apps are potential dependencies that are necessary for those apps. If there's a native app on the device that you're assuming will be there, it may not be, right? And make sure that you're aware of what apps are there, what your dependencies are, because failing to do so could mean your app install will fail because a needed dependency is not there, right? Now, I want to talk about for a minute you saw me go through and trigger a synchronization on my device as I was waiting for things to happen, right? So one of the questions that comes up sometimes is, hey, I'm going to push this deployment out, and how long is it going to take for the device to get it? And so those of us coming from the config manager world, we think in terms of policy polling cycles, and that's certainly true on managed devices, right? The way it works is when you first enroll a device, that device will check in very frequently. It varies per device, but it's usually in the neighborhood of every couple of minutes or then every 15 minutes or something like that for the first 30 minutes of enrollment. The reason the device does that is to try to get as much policy down as it can to get configured. After that 30 minutes, then the device will go to an 8 or a 6 hour check-in, as I recall, from that point forward. So the quote-unquote policy polling cycle will take place every 8 or 6 hours. Again, it varies per device. Well, that's obviously a fairly long interval, right? And so if you actually go deploy a setting, whether it's an app or a policy setting or something, to your device, oftentimes you will notice that setting, and you saw it here, right, after I did a sync, you will notice that setting shows up and is processed within a few minutes on the device. So how does that actually happen? Does that mean that you've just been lucky and the device happened to do its polling cycle while you were doing the testing? Well, that would be nice, right, to be that lucky, but no, that's not what that means. There's actually another piece to this process called the notification services. So there's one for Windows, there's one for iOS, there's one for Android. So for Windows, it's called the Windows Notification Service. For iOS, it's called the Apple Notification Service. And then for Android, it's through Google Play. And what happens is, whenever you go configure something in Intune, that configure, and when you configure and assign something in Intune, that process, especially if it's required, I should say, that process causes it may even happen with Avail. I have to check that. I can't recall. Anyway, that process causes Intune to communicate with the Windows or the Apple or the Google notification services to say, hey, something changed for this device. Go tell that device to check in right now. And so the notification service will reach down to the device, which has a persistent connection, and tell that device, go check in right now, right? And that's why things move quicker than the polling cycle. The way I view the polling cycle is kind of a backup to what should be happening automatically through the notification services, right? So whenever I did the sync, the reason I did the sync is because I had these apps on my device already, and just to make sure that things were getting through, I wanted to trigger the sync. If I would have left it alone, it should have happened in the same way, but that's just me being paranoid probably to make sure it happens, right? You can always do the sync, and when you do the sync in the Intune console, that triggers the same workflow. Intune goes and tells the notification service, hey, tell this device to go check in right now. Notification service goes and tells the device checks in, and then gets whatever configurations out there, right? So anyway, a lot of people maybe don't realize that or don't think about that or have forgotten that, right? But that's why the policies and assignments, whatever, get to your device so quickly, generally, is because of those notification services. All right, so that really wraps up what I wanted to share for this session. We will talk about Mac OS in the next session. And so we will wrap it here, and we will see you next time.